Forward, the Great Plains were a world defined by two forces, the sky above and the buffalo below. For the peoples of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Apikunni, and the Kainai, this was not a metaphor, but the fundamental truth of existence. The Iniwa, the buffalo, were the source of everything: food, shelter, tools, and spiritual sustenance. Their migrations were the rhythm of the seasons, their numbers a testament to the Creator's generosity, their presence the assurance of life itself. In 1877, facing the encroaching presence of the white settlers and the devastating impact of the whiskey trade, the great chiefs of the Blackfoot Confederacy met with representatives of the British Crown at Blackfoot Crossing. They signed Treaty 7. To the Crown, it was a land transaction, an acquisition of 50,000 square miles in exchange for reserves, annual payments, and the promise of peace. To the Blackfoot chiefs, it was something else entirely, a peace treaty, an agreement to share the land, not surrender it. They believed they were securing a future for their children, a way to live alongside the newcomers while preserving their way of life. The language was different, the concepts of ownership were alien, and the promises were written on paper, a medium as fragile as a dried leaf. This story is not about that treaty. It is about the years that followed, when the ink was still fresh, and the consequences had not yet fully bloomed. It is about the arrival of a force more transformative and more destructive than any treaty, the Canadian Pacific Railway, the Iron Serpent. It was a force that would not share the land, but conquer it. A force that would carry the instruments of the buffalo's final destruction and hasten the end of a world. This is a work of fiction, a story of a single family caught in this historical crucible. It is the story of a father who put his faith in a promise, and a son who saw only betrayal. It is a story of a people standing on the precipice of a new and terrifying reality, listening for the thunder of buffalo herds that would never return, and hearing instead the faint, approaching scream of an iron spirit that would change the land forever. Chapter 1. The Last Great Hunt. The air was electric with the promise of the hunt. From the ridge overlooking the valley, Chief many horses watched the river of brown, shaggy bodies flow across the plains. It was a small herd, smaller than the great seas of buffalo he remembered from his youth, but it was enough. The sight of them, the sound, a low thunder that vibrated through the soles of his moccasins, the smell, a rich, dusty scent of earth and life, was a prayer answered. For another season the people would eat. Their lodges would be warm. The Creator was still smiling upon them. He was a man in the autumn of his life, his face a map of the plains, etched by wind and sun. His authority rested not in noise, but in a deep, resonant stillness. He had been a great warrior in his youth, but he had lived to see the world change. He had seen the first of the red-coated mounted police, had seen the whiskey traders driven out, and he had been one of the chiefs who had touched the pen to sign Treaty 7. He had done it to buy a future for his people, a future of peace. It was a choice he defended in his heart, even as a knot of unease tightened there with every passing season. Beside him stood his son, Wolf's Tooth. He was a young man in the spring of his life, tall and coiled with a restless energy. Where his father's eyes were filled with the long view of history, his were lit with the fire of the immediate. He saw the same herd, but his gaze was different. He saw not just a gift, but a dwindling resource, a remnant of a world that was slipping through their fingers. The scouts say the herds to the south are gone. Wolf's Tooth said, his voice low and tight, hunted out by the Americans. They kill them for their hides and leave the meat to rot. Now the hunters come. From the east, the treaty was supposed to protect our hunting grounds. The treaty was for peace, and many horses replied, his voice calm but firm. It keeps the Americans out of our lands. It gives us time. We must learn to walk a new path, my son. The path of the buffalo is growing narrow. There is no other path. Wolf's Tooth countered, the fire in his eyes flaring. We are the Iniua's people. Without them we are nothing, and the newcomers do not want to share the path. They want to erase it. They come with their medicine men who say our ways are savage, and their surveyors who carve the land into squares. The word hung in the air between them, surveyors. They had been seen in the east, strange men who peered through brass tubes and drove wooden stakes into the sacred earth. They spoke of a great undertaking, a rumor that traveled on the wind from the trading posts. They spoke of an iron road. It is a road for a great metal beast, the traders had said, a serpent of smoke and iron that will cross the entire land. It will bring thousands more settlers, it will change everything. To many horses the idea was so outlandish, so alien, it was difficult to grasp. A road made of iron, a beast that was not alive. He saw it as another of the white man's strange boasts, a story told around their fires. He had signed a treaty with the Great Mother's representatives. Surely they would not allow such a monstrous thing to tear through the heart of the lands they had promised to share. To Wolf's Tooth the rumor was not a fantasy, it was a declaration of war. "It is a spear aimed at our heart, father. Can you not see it? It will be a cage. It will fence us in and the buffalo out. It will be the end of us. And you, who signed the treaty, will have been the one who opened the door for it." The accusation, though spoken softly, struck many horses with the force of a physical blow. He loved his son, but the chasm between their views of the world was growing wider with every moon. It was the chasm between memory and prophecy, between the hard, won wisdom of experience and the furious certainty of youth. "The hunt begins at dawn," many horses said, turning away from his son and the argument he could not win. He focused on the valley below, on the familiar, comforting sight of the herd. For today the old ways held, today they were still the people of the buffalo. The iron road was just a whisper on the wind, it was not yet real. But as a cool breeze swept up the ridge, it carried a scent that was not of sweetgrass or of buffalo, but of something cold, distant, and metallic. It was the scent of change. Chapter 2, The Stakes in the Earth. The whispers on the wind became a harsh reality in the summer of 1882. The surveyors, once a distant rumor, were now a constant presence. They moved with a relentless, unnerving purpose, their brass instruments glinting in the sun, their iron chains dragging across the prairie, measuring and dividing, imposing a grid of straight lines on a world of sacred curves. Many horses counseled patience. "They are mapping the land," he told the worried council of elders. "This is what the treaty allows. It is the Queen's land to map. It does not mean they will build this road." But even as he spoke the words, he felt their hollowness. The surveyors worked with the confidence of men who were not just exploring, but preparing a path. Wolf's Tooth and the younger warriors did not share his restraint. They saw the wooden stakes driven into the earth not as markers, but as violations. They began a campaign of quiet resistance. Stakes would be pulled up in the night. A survey camp's horses would be mysteriously set loose, their equipment subtly misplaced. They were small acts of defiance, ghost-like annoyances that slowed the surveyor's work and infuriated the white foreman, but did little to stop the inevitable advance. "You are children throwing pebbles at a giant," many horses warned his son during a tense council. "Their leader, the one they call Van Horn, has the ear of the Great Mother's chiefs. If you provoke them, they will send the red coats. The treaty is a shield, my son. Do not crack it with your anger." "It is a shield made of paper," Wolf's Tooth retorted, his voice ringing with passion, "and their iron road will tear it to shreds. You speak of patience while they steal the world from beneath our feet. I will not stand by and watch." The generational chasm between them had become a canyon. The father saw the long, brutal history of conflict, and knew a direct fight was suicide. The son saw the immediate, existential threat and believed inaction was the same as death. The family was a mirror of the people, torn between a past they could not reclaim and a future they could not control. Then came the graders. They followed the line of stakes like a plague of locusts, their heavy plows drawn by teams of mules, tearing a wide, raw scar across the prairie. They were loud, rough men with no respect for the land, leaving a trail of refuse and trampled earth. The scar they carved was a wound that bled dust. It cut through berry patches, diverted streams, and passed directly over a ridge that the people considered a sacred burial ground. The graves of ancestors were desecrated without a second thought. For many horses, this was a profound betrayal. He had believed the treaty was about sharing the land, and sharing meant respect. He rode to the grading camp, his full chief's regalia a stark contrast to the mud and chaos. He spoke to the foreman, a hard-faced man who listened with undisguised impatience. "This is the resting place of our grandfathers," many horses explained, his voice tight with a controlled anger. "You must move your road." The foreman simply pointed to the line of stakes. "The line is the line, chief." "I've got my orders." The railway don't go around for nobody's granddaddy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a schedule to keep." He turned his back, dismissing the chief as if he were a fly. Many horses returned to his camp, his face a mask of stone, but his heart was a storm of doubt. He had counselled peace, had put his faith in the white man's honor. For the first time he felt the terrible, sickening possibility that his son was right. Chapter 3. The Iron Serpent. The scar carved by the graders was followed by an army of track, layers, and with them came the beast of the rumors. The first time the people saw it, a profound and fearful silence fell over the camp. It was a spirit from a different world, a creature of black iron and screaming steam, its single glaring eye burning like a malevolent star. It moved with a thunderous, rhythmic roar that shook the earth, a sound that sent a primal fear through man and animal alike. Its breath was a column of thick, greasy smoke that choked the clean prairie air and left a black stain across the sky. The Iron Serpent had arrived. It was a force of nature that was entirely unnatural. It devoured the land ahead and excreted a perfectly straight, shimmering iron trail behind. It was the physical embodiment of the newcomer's world. A rigid, unyielding line that refused to bend to the contours of the land, forcing the land to bend to it instead. Worse than the beast itself was the circus of chaos that followed in its wake. With every few miles of track laid, a new end-of-track town would spring up overnight. These were not settlements of families, but festering sores of canvas tents, crude shacks, and open, air saloons, populated by the rough men who built the line and the predators who fed on them. It was a world of mud, whiskey, and casual violence. For many horses, this was the return of a nightmare. The treaty and the arrival of the mounted police had driven out the worst of the whiskey traders who had preyed on his people, trading addictive poison for precious furs and robes. Now they were back, operating with impunity from the lawless railway towns, young warriors from his own and neighboring bands, their spirits broken and their futures uncertain, were drawn to the firelight of these chaotic camps. They would return with clouded eyes and hollowed souls, having traded their last possessions for a bottle of the white man's despair. The towns also brought sickness. The camps were filthy, crowded, and without sanitation. Diseases the people had never known or had only heard of in fearful whispers now flourished on their doorstep. A cough could turn deadly in days. A fever could sweep through a dozen lodges. The proximity to this new, septic world was a constant, invisible threat. Wolf's tooth saw the corruption, and his rage solidified into a cold, hard certainty. "Do you see now, father?" He confronted many horses one evening, after carrying a young man, drunk and beaten, back from the railway camp. "Their progress is a disease. It poisons the land, it poisons our people. Your treaty does not protect us from this. It holds us here, pinned like a hide for tanning, while they scrape our world away." Many horses had no answer. He had put his faith in the honor of the Crown's representatives, in the order promised by the redcoats, but they were a handful of men in a vast land, and the Iron Serpent had brought with it a tide of chaos they were powerless to stop. The railway was its own law, and its law was one of relentless, destructive expansion. The final, terrible truth of the railway's purpose, however, had not yet been fully revealed. The Iron Serpent was more than just a carrier of chaos. It was a weapon, and as summer turned to autumn, it brought a new kind of passenger to the plains. They were not workers or settlers or whiskey traders. They were men in fine coats from the cities of the East, men with soft hands and eager eyes. And they carried a new generation of powerful, long-range rifles. They had come to see the great herds, not with reverence, but with the cold thrill of the executioner. They had come for the last of the Iniwa. Chapter 4. The Valley of Rot. For weeks, a profound gloom had hung over the camp. The scouts returned with the same news. The plains were empty. The great herds were gone, vanished as if they had been a dream. Starvation, once a distant threat, was now a gnawing presence in every lodge. The people's spirit, so intrinsically tied to the Iniwa, was beginning to fray. Then a miracle happened. A scout, his horse lathered and his eyes wide with disbelief, rode into camp with news that seemed impossible. A great herd, thousands strong, had been spotted moving south from the Red Deer River Valley, seeking refuge in the Cypress Hills. It was the last great concentration of buffalo on the northern plains, a final, magnificent pulse of a dying world. A wave of desperate hope surged through the camp. It was a sign from the Creator, a reprieve. The drums beat for the first time in months. The hunters prepared their horses, their movements filled with a renewed sense of purpose and sacred duty. For a brief, beautiful moment, the old world felt real again. Many horses saw the light return to his people's eyes, and allowed his own heart to hope. Perhaps they had been tested, and perhaps they had endured. Perhaps this was their reward. But the news of the herd, a prayer on the lips of the Blackfoot, was merely a commodity to the men of the railway. The telegraph wires, the whispering wire that Wolf's Tooth had so distrusted, hummed with the news. In the new settlements of Calgary and Regina, it was not a spiritual event, but an opportunity. An excursion was arranged. From a high ridge overlooking the valley where the herd had gathered, the family, many horses, Wolf's Tooth, and his wife, Small Bird, watched as the Iron Serpent arrived. It hissed to a stop, and from its cars disembarked the men in fine coats, their rifles gleaming. They laughed and joked, passing silver flasks between them, their voices loud and jarring in the sacred silence of the hills. They did not stalk, they did not prey, they did not seek a single animal to feed their families. They set up their long-range rifles on tripods, some even resting them on the iron rails themselves, and they began to fire into the herd. It was not a hunt. It was a massacre, executed with the detached, industrial efficiency of a factory. The sound was a continuous, deafening roar that echoed off the hills, a relentless, mechanical heartbeat of death. The buffalo, confused and terrified by an enemy they could not see or smell, did not stampede. They milled in panicked circles, their bellows of pain and fear a heartbreaking chorus. They fell, not one by one, but in swathes. The magnificent bulls, the life-giving cows, the young calves, the rifles made no distinction. Wolf's Tooth drew his knife, his knuckles white, a low growl of pure hatred rising in his throat. "I will kill them," he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. He started to rise, but his father's hand, heavy as stone, fell on his shoulder. "No," many horses said, his own voice hollow, broken. He was not looking at the hunters, but at the carnage at the end of his world laid bare in the valley below. "It is too late for that. Look, just look at what they do. You must see it. You must remember it." A small bird wept silently, her hands covering her mouth, her body trembling. They watched for hours as the slaughter continued, until the valley floor, once a moving river of life, became a dark, still carpet of the dead. The hunters cheered, slapped each other on the back, and posed for photographs as if they had accomplished a great feat of arms. Then came the final, soul-destroying desecration. The men moved among the carcasses, not with skinning knives to take the precious hides, not with reverence to take the meat, but with saws and axes. They hacked off the heads of the great bulls, trophies for their smoking rooms in Toronto or London. They took the tongues, a delicacy for their restaurants, and they left the rest. They left thousands of tons of meat, enough to feed the entire Blackfoot nation for a year, to rot under the prairie sun. The waste was the ultimate act of contempt. It was a statement of power so absolute, so arrogant, that it transcended mere violence. It was a declaration that the newcomer's world valued a severed head more than the entire existence of the people. In that moment the paper treaty did not just crack. It burned to ash and blew away on the wind. As the sun began to set, casting a blood-red light over the valley of rot, the hunters boarded their train and departed, their laughter echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. They left behind a graveyard, the air already beginning to thicken with the scent of death. They left behind 3 silent figures on a ridge, their hearts shattered, and they left behind a people whose central pillar of existence had been pulled down, leaving them to fall into a future that was now a terrifying, empty void. Chapter 5. A Home of Whispers. The winter that followed the massacre was not a season, but a slow motion calamity. The people called it the starvation winter. The valley of rot, which should have been their salvation, became a place of ghosts, its air thick with the memory of the great slaughter. The few people who dared to venture there for scraps found only bones and decay. the land itself seeming to mourn the profound violation. The camp became a home of whispers. The vibrant sounds of a living community, the laughter of children, the rhythmic beat of the drum, the songs of the women as they worked, were replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Hunger was a constant, unwelcome guest in every lodge. The government rations promised by the treaty were meager and often arrived spoiled, a cruel joke that offered no real sustenance. The people, once the proud masters of the plains, were reduced to waiting for handouts that were barely enough to keep them alive. Many horses aged a lifetime in those few months. The certainty he once had was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing guilt. He had led his people down the path of peace, and it had led them to this, a quiet, lingering death. He saw the accusation not in their words, but in their hollow eyes. He had touched the pen. He had trusted the promise. The weight of that trust, now broken, was a physical burden that stooped his shoulders. Wolf's Tooth was a phantom of the man he had been. The fire in his eyes had not been extinguished, but had burned inward, consuming him from the inside out. The rage had become a cold, silent despair. He no longer argued with his father. There was nothing left to argue about. The truth of their situation was undeniable. He spent his days staring out at the empty plains, his face a mask of grief. He saw not just the end of his people's way of life, but the end of their spirit. Small Bird, his wife, watched him with a growing sense of dread. She tried to tether him to the world of the living, to speak of the future, of the child she now carried. A secret, she hoped, would rekindle the light in his eyes. But he was already walking in the land of spirits, his heart tied to the ghosts of the Iniwa. One night, as the blizzard winds howled outside their lodge, Wolf's Tooth came to his father. He was dressed not for the cold, but in the simple leggings and moccasins of a warrior preparing for his final journey. His face was calm, the turmoil finally settled. "I am going on a hunt, father," he said, his voice soft, devoid of its old anger. A long hunt. Many horses looked at his son, and in that moment the chasm between them vanished. He saw not the angry young man who had defied him, but the boy he had taught to ride, the son he loved more than his own life, and he understood. He knew what hunt his son spoke of. The path is narrow, and many horses whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears, and the way is dark. "There is no path left here," Wolf's Tooth replied. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "My spirit can no longer breathe in this world. It belongs to the world that is gone. I will go find the Iniwa. I will tell them we did not forget them." He turned and walked out of the lodge, disappearing into the swirling snow. He did not go towards the railway, the symbol of his rage. He walked west, towards the setting sun, towards the plains that were now a vast, empty graveyard. He was a man taking his own life not out of despair, but as a final, tragic act of protest. He was choosing to join the spirit of the world he belonged to, rather than live in the one that had replaced it. Many horses did not follow. He sat in the silence of his lodge, the whispers of the wind his only companions. He had lost his argument with his son, and now he had lost his son. He had lost the buffalo, he had lost the world he knew. All that was left was the treaty, the paper shield that had protected nothing, and the screaming silence of the empty plains. Epilogue. Years passed. The Iron Serpent, now a familiar monster, crisscrossed the plains, its whistle a constant, mournful cry in the distance. The land was carved into squares of farmland, the sacred curves of the hills broken by fences. The people lived on the reserve, a small island of their old world in a vast sea of the new. The starvation winter was a dark memory, a scar on the soul of the community, but they had survived. They endured. Many Horses was an old man now, his steps slow, his face a mask of deep, etched grief and wisdom. He was no longer a chief in the old way, but an elder, a keeper of stories. He sat in the sun outside the small log cabin the government had provided, a home that felt more like a cage. The treaty he had signed had become a bitter reality of ration tickets and Indian agents, a life of dependence he had never envisioned. A small boy ran towards him, his laughter a bright, pure sound in the quiet afternoon. He was 5 years old with his mother's gentle eyes and his father's restless energy. He was the son of small bird and wolf's tooth, a child of the new world who carried the blood of the old. Many horses had named him Buffalo's Echo. The boy scrambled onto his grandfather's lap, holding up a small, crudely carved wooden figure. "Grandfather, tell me again," he said, his voice full of childish demand. Many horses took the small figure. It was a buffalo. He ran his thumb over the rough wood, the familiar shape a comfort in his hand. He looked at his grandson, at the future of his people, and knew what he must do. He could not give him back the world that was lost, but he could give him the memory of it. He could honor the promise he had made to his own son on that terrible day overlooking the valley of Rot. They were like the thunder. Many horses began, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Not the sharp crack of the storm, but the deep, rolling thunder that makes the whole world tremble. Their coats were the color of the earth, and their eyes were like chips of obsidian. They were the Iniwa, the people's life. Your father loved them more than anyone. He did not speak of the treaty, of the surveyors, or of the whiskey traders. He did not speak of the rage or the despair. He spoke of the great hunts, of the endless plains painted brown with the herds. He spoke of the sacred relationship between the people and the buffalo, of a world where the land was whole and their spirit was free. He painted a picture in the boy's mind, a picture of a world that now existed only in stories. As he spoke, the distant whistle of the train echoed across the reserve. It was the sound of the world that had taken everything. But in the small space between the old man and the young boy, another sound could be heard, the faint, phantom echo of hoofbeats on the endless plains. It was the sound of a promise being kept. It was the sound of a people remembering where the buffalo once roamed.